continuing our series on marriage and family this week, and today we're talking about the biggest challenge families face in the 21st century. Last summer, my family and I took a class at church by the name of a book by Andy Crouch, who wrote Tech Wise Everyday Steps for Putting Technology in Its Proper Place. It wasn't so much that I learned how damaging technology can be to individuals or consuming and how it shapes our worldview. It's that it presents a different perspective on how the family has changed over the years and how that has had lasting and devastating effects itself. I'll share more of what I mean as we look at what technology is exactly, but because it's not so much that all technology is bad. And it's not that technology is isolated to cell phone usage and computers. It's how the evolution of technology and our dependence on it as a society and how we've allowed it into our lives has replaced certain tasks that brought a family together to make our lives better and richer. So, before we get into it, let me remind you of the curriculum for those of you who are planning your school year for next year. We have had hard copies of Let's Get Real, Examining the Evidence for God, sell for our homeschool families. There is a student workbook and a teacher guide for anyone who needs to learn apologetics at the middle school level. We also have Train Your Brain and Introduction to Logic, which is, also includes student workbooks and a teacher guide. This is for anyone who has not learned basic logic. So anybody of any age who has not learned basic logic can learn from Train Your Brain and Introduction to Logic. You can find those books at impactapologetics.com and get those hard copy of workbooks there, especially if you like to write in something and read it to interact with the text. If you need to know basic apologetics concepts about why absolute truth exists and why there are absolute moral truths, then Baseline Apologetics is written for those around the high school level, ninth grade and up. You can find that at shandafulbright.com/shop to get a hard copy of the student workbook, and the facilitator guide is about to come out as well if you want to run a group of adults or even a high school group with that and still get some ideas on how to conversate around those subjects. All right, the entire point of this episode is to help us understand how technology and the convenience of it has changed the way families operate over the years. Some of it is for the better, and a lot of it can be for the worse, just because it's made life easy and we've kind of eased into being in our own rooms, looking up our own stuff on social media, watching our own TV shows, and it's distanced the family. The purpose of this episode is so that you, the parent, and the adults running the home can understand that what is at the center of your life forms you. So grandparents, this is for you as well. It's what do you do when your grandkids come over? Do you hand them a tablet because it's easy? Or do you still look at what is at the center of your home and how that is forming your family when they come visit? And of course, we're going to look at how that impacts our kids. George Barna, in his new book, Raising Spiritual Champions, which I just finished reading, and it's a great book for anybody who wants to understand what kids believe these days and how the world is forming them. He said that kids who go to school outside the home spend most of their day in three sections of life: more time sleeping, going to school, and consuming media. So if your kid's daily time was a pie chart, it would be split up into three sections: sleep, school, and media consumption. By the time your kids are teenagers, what trades is the education and media consumption? They sleep, then they consume media more than they actually spend time being educated. So that is something that we have to be aware of. And it makes us wonder, what role does family play in developing a biblical worldview, and why does that matter? Well, because discipleship or worldview formation is intentional, immersive, and it is not neutral, which means it's targeted instruction. If families are not intentional about the time they spend with their kids, forming their worldview and making sure it's a biblical one, it's not going to happen. If your kids are only immersed into secular education and media produced by someone without a biblical worldview, and of course, if they go to a public school, then that's also not guaranteed. You are not making disciples no matter if you never miss a Sunday service or midweek get together. It's not going to happen. So this episode is to educate parents on the atmosphere you create in your home that nurtures family time and helps you put what matters at the center of your home, since what is at the center of our lives form us. So this is what we're going to discuss today. First, what is the history of family time in the home over the years? Second, what is the atmosphere of your home and why is the parent responsible for creating an environment that puts technology where it belongs? And third, what are three practical steps that you can implement in your home right now when you in this podcast episode that nurtures an atmosphere of God first and then family? So let's look at the history of family and how technology has changed family time. Back in the day, there was no central heating and air. Okay, we're talking about decades ago, right? The center of the home was what we call the living room around the hearth. The hearth was where everyone came together to gather by fire and warm themselves. There was no cell phones. There was even before this was before TV. And so families would read books or they would listen to shows on the radio because that was their only way to be entertained. No one was going to this bedroom and that bedroom to watch this TV show or that TV show. This pretty much forced families to be together. And I don't even know if force is the right way to say it. That's just the way of life. That's what they did. They communicated and discussed the events of the day around the hearth. They ate dinner together at the table. They shared entertainment. It was the central focus of the home, and the hearth set the atmosphere, both figuratively and literally. The family came together for warmth and fellowship and spent a lot of time together. So, of course, without the intrusion of the cell phones and the distraction of the cell phones and only the communication that was going on with spending time with your family, the family was being developed by their parents. And so Nancy Piercy talked about the history of fathers taking their children to work with them decades ago. And the fathers would teach the children how to take care of the family farm or learn the family business. This was also during the time where mothers didn't work outside the home as much. So she set the tone of the home, taking care of the needs of the family and providing for their care. And it automatically set the tone that the family was first. And with that, more families easily pass on their values and beliefs to their kids because they were intentional about their time and their conversations. Their kids were immersed into a worldview of their parents through conversations, books, and working alongside them. The instruction was targeted because it was the central target of the day. It was the focus. And that's what we're talking about with technology. Has it become the focus, and how has it pulled the family away from the hearth? When technology became more and more advanced, then we see a lot of changes, right? When we think of technology, the first thing I can often think about is my cell phone, tablets, and computers, because that's what I'm on most of the day. That's how I do my work. But we don't often think of our dishwashers, heating and air conditioning, or smart cars. But those are all part of the advances of technology. And don't get me wrong, I love my dishwasher and I'm thankful that I can more quickly clean my kitchen because of it. But along with the technological advancement came an ease of life that gave us shortcuts to things that once brought us together. Instead of chopping wood with dad for a fire or helping mom knead the dough for bread, we just set the dial on the thermostat and bada boom, bada bing, we're all warm, right? There's no gathering around a hearth anymore to warm ourselves by the fire with the comfort of the family fellowship. We can all take our microwave dinners to our bedrooms and watch any show we want because there's a TV in every room. In other words, for as great as technology is, it has also been detrimental to the family because we have allowed it. Technology doesn't have its own brain or choice to pull us apart, but we've allowed it to take over and become the center of our homes because it's become easy. And for that, it's become the thing that now forms us and our kids. What does this mean for us as Christian families? Think of it this way. Your home is ground zero. That means it's the starting point for your kids. What you say, how you live, the rules you put in place, and the way you live as a Christian here is what sets the pace for everything else in the lives of your family members. If discipleship is intentional, immersive, and not neutral, which means it is targeted and focused instruction, then that means you must consider the atmosphere of your home and how you're discipling your kids and how technology impacts discipleship. If you allow phones at the dinner table, then you are having dinner with your kids' friends and social media influencers. If you allow phones while everyone is together during a board game or movie night, then you are allowing friends and social media influencers, complete strangers in some cases, into your home environment. And what's at the center of your life forms you, it shapes you, it impacts your worldview. Andy Crouch, author again of the Tech Wise Family, said this: if our families are to be all that they are meant to be, schools of wisdom and courage, they will have to become more like the church, households where we are actively formed into something more than our culture would ask us to be. And I would add, more than our culture is capable of helping us become. There is no way you or your child will develop a biblical worldview if your days are filled with sleeping, immersion into a secular environment, be it school or work, and media consumption. So, am I saying that we should all sit around the hearth and throw out the AC and heater so your family will be stronger and spend more time together? Your girl ain't crazy. But we must be intentional, immersive, and not neutral when it comes to what we allow in our homes and what we allow to happen under our own roof. Family is about the forming of persons who God has made us. Yes, your children are created in the image of God. Their identity begins there, and it also is attached to who their parents are and their family heritage. But it's also about what they become. Family shapes us regardless of the final outcome. Family is what makes you who you are. That can be a good thing or not. It all depends on what's at the center of our homes, right? So, this is what Andy Crouch also says: family forms us into persons of wisdom and courage. Wisdom is understanding and walking in it. But when you're with your family, you realize how foolish that you can be. We misunderstand each other and we see the consequences of those misunderstandings. Living in a family with other foolish people helps you see how foolish you are. Now, he's not trying to make everybody, feel like a fool. What he's saying is you can be yourself. Okay. The wonderful thing about it is our foolishness is seen and forgiven by those in our family because we're loved. So there's nothing better than being known for who you are, your mess ups and your imperfections, and still being loved by those who see them. That's why those who know me in real life, the ones that trip, there's Shanda, she trips over everything and doesn't get the joke, and they still love me, mean a lot to me because they know who you really are. And our kids should be able to land softly at home. They should be encouraged to be courageous and take the leap. Go for the big thing, take the risk. And if you strike out, who cares? You tried and we still love you. It's okay to look like the fool because you don't get, you don't understand, or you make a mistake or say the wrong answer, but not trying isn't an option. We want to encourage our kids to do the thing even if they feel like a fool, because we still love them no matter what. And what I tell my kids is this: what matters here in our home is more important than anything that matters out there, because this is who you are first. This is the real you. How you treat your brothers matter. You can be the kindest kid outside of these walls, but you can't love your brothers and if you can't love your brothers and be patient with them, nothing outside these walls matter. If you can't do it here, it's meaningless out there. And this is what families do. They help us develop wisdom by our experiences. When we fail, we learn from those things together because we don't give up on each other. Families help us work out the foolishness as we patiently correct each other, forgive each other, and learn from each other. That's what families do. You land softly at home. And so you're responsible for how your family works. But what can you do about the thing that's pulling you away from the hearth, that's pulling you away from each other and the fellowship with each other that helps develop their worldview, which is technology? So let me start by asking you this question: are you running your family, or is your family running you? I would often ask my husband this question about his business when he went through seasons of being so busy that he couldn't do anything outside of work. And this question puts things back into perspective. And then he'll flip it on me during a busy writing season and say, is your ministry running you, or are you running your ministry? And it just means, are you in control or not? So are you setting the pace and the atmosphere for your family, or are the kids telling you when and if they want to have family time, Bible studies, dinner at the table? I'm going to do an episode on discipline soon, but as for me as a mom, I'm a firm believer that in my house, it's my rules. And so is my husband. We're obviously in agreement on that. And again, we'll get to this soon on how to handle that with older kids. But I don't care how much money you pay for rent. If you live in my home, you're going to follow the rules. That's the whole gig here. My boys know this and they don't balk at it because they know that, what other choice is there? You can go get your own home and you can make your own rules. But I started the whole respect thing with my boys when they were very, very young. and they're not allowed to talk back or raise their voice or argue with me, because my philosophy means is if they can treat me like that, then they're going to treat any woman like that. All right. And it doesn't mean they haven't tried. No one's perfect. They have, but I nip it real quick. And I don't transfer discipline to my husband if the issue is between me and one of my sons. I handle that. Okay. So I don't let them run the house. There are house rules, and we keep control over that, and they'll fall in line with the house rules, or they have to go find their own house and make their own rules. That's just the way that it goes. I also think back to what Joshua said. He said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. I don't ask my kids if they want to go to church. You will go to church. That's what we do in this house. Now, again, you get your own house, you can do what you want, but as for here, we run the house. And parents, that's the whole point. Your family's your responsibility, and God will ask us to give an account for our families. Okay, so it starts with us. That's why I said, if they're going to treat me with disrespect, they're going to treat any other woman with disrespect, including their wives. And I'm not going to allow that, because they have to treat women with respect. So it's always going to start at home. And so I want to read you this passage of why it starts with us, this passage of scripture, and it's not going to sound foreign to you. It's very, very quoted, very much quoted when we're talking about parenting. But it's Deuteronomy 6:4-9. And I want to drive out or draw out a specific point here. And it says this, let's start at verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Whenever people talk about families and how to teach kids, they mention this passage. But what I want to remind you of first, whether you have kids at home or not, this isn't only for parents of young kids. It starts with you. It's always going to start with you. You can only impress onto your children what is important and of value to you. If loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind isn't your aim, don't expect to influence your kids to do it. I mean, George Barna also says that the most effective parents, the only time actually when parents are influential, is when you practice what you preach. If you tell them to believe in God and then you live for God, you will influence them to live for God. But if you say live for God and you don't, or believe in God and you don't live for him, you've lost your influence with your kids because they see inconsistencies. So you can forget the success of verses 7-9 in this verse if you don't love God with all your heart first. If you're not looking at verses 4-6, if you don't live verses 4-6, forget 7-9. But no doubt you are responsible for this, because it's a command. And we see that in verse 1. So how you run your family is all about the environment that you create. It's all about your environment and the rhythms you create in your home. It will always start with you. I always tell parents that God has called us to be diligent to teach our kids, no matter what the culture looks like. But parenting for our parents looked a lot different than the way that we have to parent. Diligence for them, they still had to be diligent, and we have to be diligent, but it looks different for us. My parents limited screen time in regard to TV, like don't watch so much TV. We never had to worry about smartphones. And now we have to limit screen time in regard to smartphones. When I taught fifth grade, I could not believe that my students had a cell phone. Why? They can't even drive. What do they need a cell phone for at 10? The research on the cell phone usage and how it's detrimental to a child's development and how dangerous it is and what it exposes them to at such a young age is vast. You can find it anywhere. The research has been done on it. We've had cell phones long enough to know that it is not positive. Your home environment has to include cell phone rules. It's just going to have to include the use of technology. What age is appropriate for a child to have a phone? If your child needs a phone, needs one, I suggest, and that's only going to be for communication purposes, I suggest a flip phone for communication purposes only. My boys can't watch YouTube in their rooms alone. That's a house rule of ours, just because YouTube will take them down a rabbit hole, and I don't want them being exposed to things that they shouldn't be exposed to. Now, again, my oldest is now 20 and my middle is 18, and we pay for their phones. So that's the phone rule. If they want to pay for their own phones, the house rule of no YouTube in their bedrooms will still be in place because that's the house rule. It is a house rule, unless we're all together at the, we watch YouTube, we watch cooking shows and things like that together in the living room. We'll do that sometimes on YouTube together. So my youngest, who's 14, cannot have social media of any kind. And we no longer have free games because on his phone, because they're known to slip something in that children should not see. So if we're going to get any games, which I think he has 1 or 2 sports games on his phone, then we pay for them, because if not, we're going to pay one way or the other. And I don't want it to be with his innocence. So think about the rules of technology. Again, Andy Crouch says this in his book. He suggests technology breaks. And I believe it's 1 hour out of the week, 1 day out of the month, and 1 week out of the year. When you think about it, that is not that difficult. And he says his family even chooses on Sundays, they'll take a whole technology break from everything, laptops, computers, cell phones, etc. And they'll even eat dinner by candlelight. And so I love listening to that. And I want to do that with my family. My boys love that kind of stuff. And they love eating dinner at the table. So if you just say, hey, we're going to do candlelight tonight, then I think that they would love it. So that's not a huge commitment to do 1 hour out of the week. Well, I think it's 1 hour a day, 1 day out of the week, 1 week out of the year, something like that. You have to go to his book. I think I just contradicted myself. I'm like, wait, what did he say again? But technology breaks. And I take my technology break when we go on vacation, which I plan to do in June. So you just have to figure it out and figure out how you're going to be consistent with that, right? Because it shows that when you take a break from technology, you can cut the rest of the world off, because we don't need to allow them into the intimate moments of our lives. Okay. We also don't have cable TV in our home. We always plan a movie to watch as a family, which means sometimes we have to buy it for like a few dollars off of Amazon or something. But to be honest, I don't watch a lot of TV anyways, because I am usually writing, reading, or doing something. And now that that's kind of like the thing that we do in the house, the boys have taken on that habit, thankfully. So TV watching is very planned out in our home. We just kind of do it. We don't say, hey, no watching TV until after that time. It just happens to be that way. My youngest does like to watch Dude Perfect and like baseball plays from YouTube on the TV. He can watch that in the living room. But the noise from the TV gets super annoying for me when I'm trying to read or type. So that's going to be like no TV right now, because we're all trying to read. But it just depends on the day. That again, that kind of accidentally happened. Our family kind of moved into that, where we just don't watch a lot of TV, because my husband and I created an environment in our home where we sit around and talk a lot. We do debate certain topics since we're into apologetics. And we've also invited people to come debate topics with us, like Calvinism, and we order pizza, and it gets heated sometimes, because we're all learning to debate without such emotion, especially because they're young and everybody wants to talk. So my point is this: you are the one who sets that temperature in your home. Your kids are going to fall in line with the rhythms of your home. If you let things go and everyone disperses to their own side of the room, then that's what you're going to get: distance in communication and fellowship. And that means you are not going to influence your kids, their beliefs, their values, and their worldview as much as you think they are. But that also means if your kids are spending more time with outside influences, and by this, I mean their phones, their influencers, then they're getting their worldview formation by what is at the center of their lives. And if it's not you, then it will be something else. That's just the way it works. And that's what I hope parents and the church really understands. So when you end this episode and you stop listening, I'm going to give you 3 practical steps to nurture a godly environment, something that you can do right away. And again, if this isn't your norm, it may take a few weeks to become a habit or a pattern. No matter how much pushback you get from your kids, deal with it. Deal with it. And even if you were like heavy-handed on the schedule, like my house, my rules, and you were like, this is, you weren't really reining them in before, you're going to get pushback, but expect it, but be consistent. And I guarantee you, kids like boundaries. They do love to talk to their parents and they want to be heard. So nurture that. And this is how you do it. Some of you might be wondering, okay, where do I start? Like, how do I do this? And again, let me just say this. If your kids don't like to read right now, don't expect them to want to read tomorrow. I mean, you have to understand that this is going to take time to implement if you're just starting now and they're getting older. Like if they're 10 or if they're tweens and teens, expect pushback and be okay with it, but this is the way that it's going to be. That's what you have to say. Okay. So I did mention a few things we do in our home. And the first one I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do with you on this is ask you a question. What is at the center of your home? You can answer this question by thinking about where your family spends the most time when they walk into your home. Is it in the kitchen together? Do you guys stand around while you're cooking or you're preparing for dinner and you talk? Is it in the living room watching TV? Is it in their bedrooms? Does most of the time when they all get home, everybody's gone up to their own rooms. Where do you spend the most time and what are you doing there? That's how you're going to know what's at the center of your homes. If it's not in a place where you come together and carry on conversations about what took place that day, what they're looking forward to, and maybe even the pressing issues of life, what's going on in your life? How was school today? I ask my kids every day, how was school? How was work when they all walk through the door? That is just my first question. I want to know how it went with them. So ask them, how was your day? How was school? What does tomorrow look like? Do you have any homework? I mean, those are the things that my kids can say that mom asks all the time. My parents ate dinner with us at the table every night, and I loved it. I knew we were going to eat dinner together every night, and I had to cook sometimes, and so did my sister. I was not a good cook. When I was 16, I mean, what do you expect? You're going to get burnt chicken, but it was still fun. We loved it. It was my favorite part of the day because we got to talk to each other and I got to tell my parents what was going on in my life. So your kids will love this because they want you to be interested in them. And if you have a hard time spurring on conversations, get these things called conversation cards. They're just simple things about what was your most embarrassing childhood memory, or, what is the thing you hate to eat? They're just simple things. Conversation cards, and you go around the table and everybody gets to answer the question. Sometimes you do one question, sometimes you do two. We've had several packs of these and we go through all the questions. There's hundreds of them. And now my boys just get them out. I don't even have to ask them to get them. Sometimes I don't want to do it. And they'll do it anyways because they enjoy those conversation starters. So find a place that becomes the center of your home where you talk about things, where everybody congregates. If it's the dinner table, fine. If it's the living room, fine. But then that means all the devices and distractions have to be out of that space. You have to say, while we're here together discussing, nobody gets to have a cell phone. Okay. Nobody gets to have that thing because we're shaping each other's lives. Second, that means you got to set the tech rules. Remember what is at the center of our lives form us. If your phone's going to be at the center of your life, it's going to form you, it's going to form your kids. But that means you have to let the technology go too. You don't have to answer an email or a text message right away. You don't have to answer a phone call for 45 minutes to an hour during dinner time. Let your kids know that they're important to them, that you're important to them, and let the technology go. If your kid's day is split into 3 sections of where they spend most of their time, remember, sleep, school, and media consumption, then they're being discipled by someone other than you. I suggest reading Tech Wise by Andy Crouch, maybe even the Raising Spiritual Giants by George Barna, and look at the 10 steps. Andy Crouch has 10 steps for how to keep technology in its proper place. Look at that in a couple chapters into the book. He's not saying technology is bad. He's saying it has a place, and its place is not at the center of your child's life. It's not at the center of your family. Reclaim that space, reclaim the center of that, and kick technology out of that space because it doesn't need to be forming your worldview or your kids. And that brings us to the third thing that you can do immediately to cultivate an environment for discipleship and growth in your family. Make your kids think and create. Things in our homes have made life easy everywhere. That's the premise of Andy Crouch's book. Certain things do not encourage critical thinking and creativity. They encourage laziness and someone thinking for you or what to think instead of how to think. Andy Crouch uses the example that instead of learning to play the guitar and make music, we push play on a device. Instead of playing board games and sitting outside, we play video games and put headphones on and talk to people outside of our homes. Nurturing an environment where kids learn how to think through hard things, have hard conversations, and learn to create with their own hands and mind is an environment that helps them grow and be who God created them to be. Can you still use technology to do this? Sure, but put it where it belongs. Here's an example for my own family. My older two boys and I share an Audible account, and we all buy books that we share with each other, and then we talk about them. My middle son always asks me what book he should read next, and we discuss what he wants to learn, and we go from there. We throw a question out to our boys in the living room, and a lively debate starts. Like, hey, what's the difference between absolute truth and subjective truth? Should truth have the word subjective in front of it? And so we discuss those things, and we get them thinking. And some people will ask, okay, how did you get there? How did you get to the point where they want to read books, or they think debating on a Friday night is fun instead of like watching TV? I started when they were babies. And in all honesty, I did it because I'm a teacher. I didn't really even do it from the view that I need to develop their worldview, because I didn't know anything about that at the time. I was raised in church. I've always been very diligent to read them the Bible and say, okay, I want them to know who God is. That was the way I looked at it. I want them to learn, and I want them to know who God is. I wasn't thinking worldview development. I wasn't that smart about it, to be honest with you. I didn't learn those things in church. I didn't know how important that aspect was. But thank God, my goal was still, I want them to learn, and I want them to know who God is. And so I graduated with my bachelor's degree as a big fat I'm talking, I gained 50 pounds with every kid. And I was huge. I was about 8.5 months pregnant, 20 something years old. And then a year later, after my oldest was 1 year old, I ended up getting my teaching credentials. So I was going, we were newly married. I was going to college, big pregnant. And so I was already in the education field when my kids came along, and I wanted my kids to love to learn. So I bought all of the books, had hundreds, I'm talking hundreds of books. I would go to Scholastic when they weren't cray cray, and I would buy lots of books and take my 1 year old at the time, because I graduated and was teaching kindergarten. We would go to Scholastic and buy a bunch of books. And then he had a bunch of books, and I read a book a night and the Bible every single night, one book. And I would read the Bible to them every night. And then when my middle was born, he was in on that nightly routine. And then when my youngest was born, all three of them together, we would do it. It was a long bedtime routine, very long. My husband would always ask me when I come to bed, what takes so long to put those boys to bed? Every night he would say that. And I'd tell him, you know, I'm reading them a book, I'm reading them the Bible, we take the baths and we say the prayers and we sing the songs. It was an ordeal. It was an event that, like I said, took 45 minutes to an hour. To get it done quicker, I would just sing the songs faster, but I would never eliminate the book reading or the Bible. And so when they were in middle school, I started to give them some of that responsibility. And I told them that, here's how you read your Bible. I want you to start in the book of John, and it's going to be, you're going to have to learn how to develop that love for the word of God. And it wasn't always perfect. Nothing ever is. Again, remember what I told the ladies at the ladies conference this past weekend? We live life in a post Garden of Eden world. Nothing's ever perfect. Parenting is never perfect. The things that we try to instill in our kids doesn't always look great. It looks ugly and messy. Sometimes bedtime is like, I cannot wait to get this done and get these kids in bed. I'm exhausted. But I wouldn't skip it because it was easy. I wouldn't push play on an Audible when they were little. I sat them on my lap and I read to them. We have to understand that things are not going to be perfect, but I wanted my boys to know that their relationship with God was their own, and they needed to think about that. So as they grew up, I continued to communicate that with them and nurture that. And then even today, again, my boys are 20. The oldest is now 20. The middle is 18. My youngest is 14. And me and my youngest are a lot more hands-on still. He comes to me all the time and will be like, just the other day, he asked me about what is a slave to righteousness. And I'm reading Romans 6. And he's always been curious about the Bible. I'm so thankful to the Lord for that, because again, I'm like, how in the world is a 14-year-old this curious about theology? He asks lots of deep questions. And I ask the Lord all the time, help him to never lose that love of learning your word and curiosity. But I still check on my boys. I don't care how old they are. This is mom. Like I'm mama, and I will come to them and I'll be like, what are you reading today? What book of the Bible are you in? When's the last time you read your Bible? How's it going? Do you need any resources from me? What can I do? And I encourage them to learn and be able to articulate a reason for why they believe what they do. Because my oldest struggled with doubt when he was 15, I think it was, maybe 16, can't remember now. And when we got into apologetics, he realized, oh, there are reasons. And I realized then that we had to go deeper, that even the little things that I was doing maybe wasn't enough, that I needed to help him find the answers, but he really needed to stay on that search for truth. What I'm trying to say is this: sometimes God is, well, all the time, God is faithful and God fills in where we lack. Again, when I was thinking about my boys when they were babies, I wasn't thinking about worldview formation. I just wanted them to know who God was. And I also wanted them to learn. I wanted them to be able to read and write and just be able to succeed in school, because as a teacher, that was important to me. So I did both of those things because as a Christian mom, it was very important to me to nurture their own love for who God was. So even though then I wasn't thinking about what I think about now, what I've learned, God has taken that and really helped nurture that in them. And it doesn't mean I don't pray still. And that doesn't mean that I don't still have house rules and nurture those things. Diligence. Remember Deuteronomy 6. Diligence is always the call to parents. It'll look different across the generations. I think it's harder for us in the 21st century. If you ask the parents, what's the most challenging thing about parenting? Number one answer is they're going to say technology. But I think it's because it's running them and their parenting. They're not running it. We have to remember technology can have a place in our lives. It is here to stay, but we have to learn how to run it, and rather than it running us. And that means you have to think of it this way: the more I let it run our family, the more it's going to continue to be the center of our lives. And it's going to shape my child's worldview. And that is a no-go for me. So I am going to take control over that technology, put it in its proper place, and make sure that we put the family at the center, put God at the center, and allow that to form our children. So I don't have a huge following on social media, but I do get plenty of comments of people telling me what they think or pushing back on some of my podcasts. That's fine. I don't care. And I don't answer back on everything because some of it's just not worth it. But one of the things Christians will say is, well, what do you expect this culture to look like? God only has a remnant. Not everyone's going to get saved. There's going to be less, a smaller amount of people who actually follow the Lord. It is what it is, as if that's a pass for them not to discipline others or to be passive about making God known. But just because narrow is the gate and there will always be a remnant does not mean that God does not expect us to take up the Great Commission and go and make disciples of all nations. But no matter what the go part looks like for any of us, every one of us is responsible for our own families. At the very least, you should be diligent in your own home to create an environment that gives the best to your family. And once they leave the house, at least you'll know that you gave it your all and you gave your best to your kids. Isn't that what it's all about? Your family is your most important investment, and your home is the most sacred space. You have to do that. I hope that this message or this episode encouraged you and gave you some ideas for how to create an environment that nurtures the biblical formation of your family. If you have any questions for me, you can email me at hello@shandafulbright.com, and I'll catch you on the next one.